the first murder in human history. It was not for money, nor for land. According to legends, with a marriage dispute between two brothers.
According to traditional narrations, Adam's two sons, Abel and Cain, disputed over marriage.
They were told to present an offering to seek God's judgment. Abel gave his best with sincerity, but Cain did not. God accepted Abel's offering, and jealousy led to the first murder in human history. Now, let's go back to where it all began.
The valley held two lives under a single roof, yet the ground they walked felt miles apart. Abel moved through the pasture with slow, deliberate steps. He knelt in the tall grass, hands steady as he checked the breathing of a lamb, his touch light enough to avoid startling the flock. He was a creature of patience, defined by the steady rhythm of his breathing and the calm of the open fields. A few miles away, the pace shifted. Cain drove a spade into the dry earth, his muscles bunching as he forced the tool deep into the clay. Sweat tracked lines through the dust on his face. His eyes did not linger on the soil. They scanned the horizon, restless and sharp, as if waiting for a signal only he could hear. When they returned to the hut at dusk, the space between them grew. Abel set down his shepherd's staff and went to the hearth, his movements fluid and quiet. Cain remained by the door, his jaw tight, his hands still clenched as if he were still gripping the spade. They shared the same bread, the same father, and the same air. Yet the silence between them was heavy, vibrating with an unspoken distance that deepened with every setting sun. The command arrived like a sudden shift in the wind, demanding an offering of gratitude. Abel did not hesitate. He walked into the center of his flock, his eyes scanning for the strongest, healthiest ram. He found it near the creek, moved forward with a soft whistle, and caught the animal by the neck. His hands worked with a practiced, gentle precision, checking the weight of the wool and the clarity of its eyes. He led the chosen ram toward the path, his steps light and purposeful. Across the clearing, the atmosphere turned cold. Cain stood before his own harvest. He looked at the row of full golden grain, then shifted his gaze to a patch of stunted, withered stalks near the edge of the field. His fingers brushed the healthy wheat, then pulled back. He reached down and gripped the dry, brittle stems of the inferior crop instead. He bundled the dead stalks, his face a mask of iron, and tied them with a rough cord. He did not look toward the house. He did not look toward his brother. He simply hoisted the bundle onto his shoulder, his movements sharp and jagged, and began the climb toward the high ground, leaving the best of the earth behind. The wind died as they reached the stone altar. Abel placed his offering down, his hands trembling slightly, then stepped back and bowed his forehead to the cold earth. He did not look up. He did not wait for a sign. He simply knelt, his breathing shallow and steady. Cain dropped his bundle of withered stalks on the opposite side of the stones. He stood upright, arms folded across his chest, staring at the sky with a rigid, expectant posture. A sudden, blinding flash erupted from the clouds, descending in a focused pillar of white heat. It engulfed Abel's ram. The air roared, then vanished into ash. In the vacuum that followed, the light receded, leaving the stone beneath Cain's offering untouched, dark, and damp with morning mist. The contrast was absolute. Abel remained still, his face pressed into the dirt. Cain did not move. He stared at the charred remains of his brother's gift, then at his own rotting harvest. His jaw muscles locked. The skin around his eyes pulled tight, narrowing his gaze into a sharp, jagged line. He did not blink. He did not breathe. A vein pulsed visibly against his temple as he watched the smoke drift away, his entire frame vibrating with a suppressed electric intensity. Cain stepped forward, the heels of his boots grinding the loose stones into the earth. He closed the distance until his chest was inches from his brother. He raised a hand, fingers curling into a heavy, white-knuckled fist. His voice cut through the mountain air, low and serrated. "I will surely kill you." Abel did not step back. He did not flinch. He looked up, his eyes wide and steady, tracing the tension in Cain's neck and the tremor in his raised arm. A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of the wind rushing over the ridge. Abel leaned in slightly, his hands open and palms facing upward, a gesture of total surrender. God accepts only from those who fear him, Abel spoke, his tone calm and unhurried. He held Cain's gaze, refusing to let his eyes wander. Even if you raise your hand against me, I will not raise mine against you. I fear the Lord of the worlds. Cain's chest heaved, his lungs pulling air in ragged, uneven bursts. He stared at his brother, the fist still poised, the muscles in his forearm corded with effort. He did not strike. He simply stood there, frozen by the weight of the words, while Abel's expression remained unchanged, a mirror of absolute, unyielding peace. Abel turned, his back a pale shadow against the darkening horizon as he walked away toward the flock. Cain remained rooted to the spot, watching the distance grow. He did not follow, yet he did not move toward his own hearth. The night air turned sharp, biting at his skin, but he ignored the cold. He returned to his sleeping mat, but the ground felt uneven, biting into his spine. He rolled onto his side, eyes wide, staring at the thatch roof. The silence of the valley was absolute. It pressed against his eardrums like deep water. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Abel's calm, unmoving face burned in his mind. He sat up, his movements stiff and mechanical. He paced the small perimeter of the room, his feet tracing the same worn path into the dirt floor. Outside, an owl screeched, a jagged sound that tore through the quiet. Cain stopped, his breath hitching. He looked toward the door, then back at the dark, empty corner of the room. He clenched his jaw until the bone ached. The frustration he felt was no longer a heat. It had cooled into a heavy, leaden weight. He stopped pacing and stood perfectly still. The night was no longer a time for rest. It was a shroud for his thoughts, and in the suffocating stillness, his path became clear. Dawn arrived not with light, but with a thick, gray shroud that clung to the valley floor. Cain emerged from the shadows, his movements fluid and silent. The damp air beaded on his skin, but he did not shiver. He scanned the ground, his gaze darting between the gray stones until he found it a jagged, heavy piece of rock that fit perfectly into his palm. He bent down, his fingers closing around the cold surface, testing the weight. It was substantial, biting into his grip. He stood, his breathing shallow and rhythmic. He moved through the mist, his boots barely disturbing the soft earth. Ahead, the outline of a figure appeared, a stationary shape against the pale morning sky. Abel stood with his back turned, his attention fixed on the grazing flock. Cain slowed his pace, the distance closing until he was within reach. He stopped. The fog seemed to thicken, isolating them in a small gray circle. He took one final step, his shadow falling across the grass. Abel sensed the shift in the air and turned. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the sound of the wind. They locked eyes. The world held its breath. The stillness was absolute, a final, fragile moment before the violence was unleashed. The stillness shattered. Cain moved with a sudden, violent lunge. The rock swung in a tight arc, whistling through the damp morning air. A dull thud echoed across the barren landscape, followed by the sound of weight hitting the earth. The flock startled, bleating in panic, but the sound faded into a ringing silence. Cain stood frozen, his arms still extended, the jagged stones slipping from his numb fingers. He stared at the ground. The fury that had driven his muscles seconds ago evaporated, leaving a vacuum in its place. He did not move to look at his hands. He did not move to flee. He stood as if rooted to the soil, his chest rising and falling in shallow, jagged gasps. The world felt too large, too empty. The air grew still again, heavy and stagnant. He took a half-step back, then stopped, his legs shaking under the sudden, crushing weight of what he had done. He looked down at the silent form, but his eyes saw nothing. A hollow, paralyzing emptiness took hold of his mind, turning his thoughts into static. The valley had become a grave, and he was the only living thing left within it. The sun climbed higher, casting long, harsh shadows across the valley. Cain remained motionless, a statue of grief and shock, until a sharp, guttural sound broke the silence. 2 crows descended from the sky, landing a few paces away. They circled each other, beaks snapping, feathers flying in a frantic, primal struggle. One bird lunged, its talons finding purchase, and soon the other lay still on the dry grass. Cain watched, his breath hitching in his throat. He expected the survivor to fly away, but it did not. The bird hopped toward its dead companion, then began to scrape at the earth with its claws. It worked with rhythmic precision, pushing dirt aside, digging until a hollow was formed. It nudged the dead crow into the pit and began to cover it with soil. Cain leaned forward, his hands trembling as he gripped his knees. A realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. A bird, a creature he deemed beneath his own kind, possessed the instinct to honor the fallen, while he stood paralyzed, unable to even hide the evidence of his own handiwork. The weight of his inferiority pressed down on him, and he fell to his knees in the dust, his own hands suddenly feeling heavy and useless. "Woe to me," he cried out, his voice cracking against the stillness of the valley. "Am I unable to be even like this crow and cover the body of my brother?" The question hung in the air, unanswered by the wind. He crawled toward the earth where Abel lay, his fingers clawing at the packed dirt. The ground was stubborn, dry, and resistant, but he did not stop. He pushed his nails into the grit, tearing at the surface until the soil gave way under his palms. He scraped, he shoveled, he piled the loose earth to the side, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. His skin broke against a sharp stone, leaving streaks of red in the dust, but he ignored the sting. The hole grew deeper, a dark void in the landscape that mirrored the one forming in his own chest. He worked until his muscles burned and his breath came in ragged, uneven hitches. Every handful of dirt he threw over the body felt like a layer of stone sealing his own fate. He was burying his kin, and with every movement, the finality of the act carved itself into his resolve. He did not look up. He did not seek the horizon. He only dug until the last trace of the brother he had taken was hidden from the light of the sun. The sun dipped below the jagged rim of the valley, pulling the warmth from the air. The long, golden light of the day faded into the bruised purple of twilight, leaving the landscape in shadow. Cain stood slowly, his hands caked in dry earth, his fingers stiff from the hours of labor. He looked at the mound of dirt, the final resting place of his own blood. The valley was silent now, save for the cooling wind that rattled the dry grass. There would be no return to the fields, no harvest, and no peace. He walked away, a solitary figure disappearing into the deepening gloom. The story of what transpired here did not end with the setting of the sun. It seeped into the ground, becoming a tremor that would shake the history of all who followed. It remains a grim testament to the cost of unchecked rage. The truth is carved into the foundation of human existence. Whoever takes a life unjustly, it is as if he has killed all of mankind. The valley settled into the dark, a hollow monument to a choice that could never be undone. The silence of the earth now holds the warning for all generations to come.